All right, and welcome back to episode 72 of The Bench, powered by Wowhead, where we are going to be joined later by special guest Ellesmere to discuss everything in the game that's been going on lately, from interrupts to healer pruning, fellowship I think probably is going to end up getting discussed, and add-ons. We're not going to delay this any further, so let's jump on into that conversation that we got to catch up with Ellesmere for. All right, and we are joined by third place MDI competitor, recently discussed as by Growl as a cybernetic enhancement enthusiast, healer kick enjoyer, Ellesmere Gaming. Welcome.
Hi, Tuttles.
How are you doing, buddy?
What up?
Hope you've been doing well.
I'm good. I'm chilling. Was not expecting to have my ears blown out, but I appreciate that.
Well, got to give you a proper introduction. Okay, so we're having a discussion last week talking about add-ons, and we have seen some of your tweets recently where you have been having some takes on the game related towards things such as, healer interrupts and complexity and, just the pruning of classes and how that's been going. And we thought, it would probably be a good time to bring you on to actually talk about what your thoughts are in regards to add-ons and healer kicks and pruning and stuff like that in the game. Because I think that right now you are probably one of the best articulated opinions of the pro add-on camp, I would say.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we have this issue on the pod where we tend to agree a lot of stuff, which can be good, but when our opinion doesn't necessarily match like the general population, sometimes we get into problems in the comments. And we were thinking the other day, because we were kind of talking about add-ons, and all of us are kind of just over it. We're kind of just like, yeah, whatever, delete all add-ons. We don't care if our UI sucks. But I feel like you represent a lot of people in the sense that like you get a lot of enjoyment out of like customizing things, thinking about how you can min-max, like improving your gameplay, like, outside of the game with your UI, and then like going in and like applying it in. And then I also thought it would be a banger to have you on because you've also been, like we were previously, incredibly addicted to Fellowship. And you've been playing so much Fellowship every time I tune into your stream, which is kind of like the anti, right? It's like it doesn't have the healer kicks and it doesn't have the add-ons and stuff. So I feel like your takes are going to be sharp, and I feel like you're going to farm W's in the comments today.
It's possible, or I'm gonna piss a lot of people off. We'll see.
I think
That's my job. Don't worry. I'll take aggro in the comments.
I think that having well-balanced opinions on the podcast is valuable.
Also, for what it's worth, Vigor does have a kick, sort of.
Okay, kicks at Fellowship are so much different than kicks in World of Warcraft. Vigor has like a Hodge or like a Blinding Light. Maybe.
No, because it's off the GCD, and that's the important part.
Okay.
That's what makes it viable as a kick.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Fellowship a little bit first, because that's no one's playing World of Warcraft anyway. You were kind of in the boat with a lot of people who didn't necessarily get into it right away. Like, you weren't playing the betas, and you kind of like didn't start for the first couple of days if you were busy. But once you got into it, you've been really liking it. I kind of want to know what your like expectation was going into it, and then how that's changed over the last like 2 weeks that you've been playing it a shit ton, and like your overall thoughts on the game.
My big problem initially was that the graphics and the music and like the immersiveness of it wasn't really my style, like art-wise, and it kind of turned me off a little bit. Felt a little mobile gamey in terms of how it looked. And so I think that in combination with the fact that everybody was trying to frame it as like the WoW M plus killer and shit like that, which just kind of turned me off from it, because I knew that wasn't true. That no matter what the game was, it wasn't going to be the WoW M plus killer, because people have been saying that same stupid shit for like 10 years about a billion different games, and it's never true. So I it just felt like, okay, this is another, overhyped, game that's going to last a few weeks, and then no one's going to care, and everyone's going to go back to M+. But I couldn't be more wrong. It genuinely, well, no, I will say that I don't think that it's a WoW M+ killer in any way. I think that it's a very different game from WoW M+, even though it's obviously heavily influenced by WoW M+ and based on that concept. And it does an excellent job of capitalizing on the strengths of WoW M+ and developing it further, and really coming up with a lot of creative solutions to problems that current WoW M+ has on retail. I think that it's a really fun game in and of itself, and that people comparing it to WoW M+ are doing the game a disservice, because it really is its own thing. And what it is super, super, super fun. I think that both WoW and Fellowship can coexist really well, and that they can both learn a lot from each other and improve their games from, watching what each other do. Uh, and so I hope that people are able to enjoy both rather than trying to pit them against each other and do the kind of, it's either this or the other one type of thing, which
I
I
think
don't
that
love.
I think that World of Warcraft players have a tendency to be like, well, I'm only playing one video game, so it's us versus them, and it's like, I don't
Yeah.
I don't know if they've ever played like a solo player game or anything else, but like for me, it's like, oh, I'm enjoying both like almost simultaneously. Now, I'm not really playing much
Yeah.
WoW right now. WoW's kind of dead. That's a completely
I get
different.
it.
Did you play much like Diablo or like PoE or anything, Ellie?
Not PoE, but I did play Diablo.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this Fellowship is a game, like, I almost get jealous sometimes of the people that play, like, that are really into Diablo or PoE or whatever, because they get, like, a really fun reset season thing all the time, like, during WoW Dead Time, and I'm just, like, sitting here in Dornegal by myself while they're all having fun, like the Squidward meme watching out the window, and I kind of feel like Fellowship is now this for us, where it's, like, the ARPG grind wasn't quite my thing, but like this is totally my thing where literally every single new season of Fellowship, I might not go super hard, but like I'm definitely going to try and like play and like check out what's new and see the dungeons and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree.
I remember
What do you
back
think,
when
like-
we
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say back when we first played it for the first time on Alpha, one of the things that I think we all agreed was that if this releases at the same time as a WoW season, it's dead. And I think they actually launched it at the perfect time. So
Yeah, it was a
props to them
I
for
agree.
nailing it.
What do you think? Can you put your finger on like what exactly like makes it different? Like, is it just the fact that it's like a new set of eyes on the same M plus formula, or like because Dorky said almost the same thing as you, were like he was kind of comparing it too much to WoW, but as soon as he just kind of like thought of it as another game to play, it was like, dang, this is mega fun. But I can't quite put my finger on like what's different, right? Because it is kind of just Mythic Plus, I guess.
Well, it is M plus, but what's different is the core gameplay. How the combat, how you move around, like how your character plays, how you cast spells, like the core combat is very different from WoW combat, even though there are a lot of similarities in terms of like what you're pressing, the way the buttons feel, and the way your character like moves and everything. It feels so vastly different from WoW. And it's really the thing that sold me on the game. The combat is like, because normally for me to get into a game, like I said, initially I was pretty turned off by it because of the graphics and the music. I'm somebody who enjoys getting immersed in a game. And so like for WoW, for example, like the world really draws me in. The art, the immersiveness of the world. So for a game like this to be able to draw me in, it really has to be from a different aspect, and that was combat. The combat is just incredibly satisfying, especially healing. I haven't felt healing feel this good in terms of like satisfaction of pressing my buttons and how the spec interacts in a very long time.
So expanding on that a little bit, let's talk about like how healers are playing. So we and we can also kind of talk about this tangentially with like World of Warcraft is doing with its healers. So WoW is going through a pruning. They're turning Restoration Shaman into a 2-button specialization. They've removed Cloudburst Totem. This is the worst thing that they've ever done to healing. They're looking to prune the game and try to make it more simple. Fellowship launches and their classes, like you kind of said, are more simple. But what makes the healing different, and what, if anything, can World of Warcraft learn about that in terms of making healing fun yet not overly complicated? Because I think that's a common criticism of WoW specs lately, is that there's too much bloat with them.
Yeah, I don't really understand the crowd that's like super against pruning because they're worried that it's going to affect skill expression. Because if you look at League of Legends, for example, you've got 5 buttons, and yet you have so much skill expression with those buttons. And I think that people often conflate like amount of buttons with complicatedness of the spec and how much skill you can express within that spec, when that's just not the case. And Fellowship is a great example of that, where you have tons of skill expression, but significantly less buttons than, you know, pre-midnight pruning WoW classes would have. And part of what makes it feel satisfying is that the buttons that you do have all feel really good to press. There are basically no buttons that I have that when I press it, I'm like, wow, that kind of sucked. Like, you know, except for my one filler, which is what it's supposed to be. So every other button feels incredibly satisfying to press, especially as a healer. Like when I press it, I know exactly what I'm going to get from it. It's going to do big healing, it's going to do big damage, it's going to like have some sort of really positive effect on my group. In WoW, I have to press like 10 buttons to get that same feeling. And so I think that part of what WoW is trying to do with this button pruning is to create that same concept where there are less buttons, but the buttons that you do have, you can actually feel the impact when you press them, because I do think that it leads to very dull gameplay when you're just spamming buttons and so many of them don't feel good to press. Like Holy Paladin, for example, you have like 7 different builders, and half those builders feel like shit to press because they don't do anything by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then the spenders only feel good sometimes, because in order for them to feel really good, you have to have 6 modifiers toppled on top of each other, you know, from your various different interactions. And it's like, yes, that does add some artificial, you know, it's very surface level skill expression where it's like, and a lot of it got handled by weak auras, where it was like, okay, if I have X amount of stacks of this, then show an icon, and then I know to press this button, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is why a button pruning is necessary for WoW, and why I don't really understand the crowd that thinks that the button pruning is going to be bad. There are plenty of things that I do think will be bad, that I am highly concerned about going into midnight, and we'll talk about those, I'm sure. But the button pruning is definitely not one of them, except for Resto Shamans. Rest in peace, brothers. Stay strong.
Yeah, I feel like the
Hold
button
on,
pruning
one
thing
second,
is
one
really
second, one
interesting.
second. Let me change the server that we're on Discord, because it's doing some weird shit.
Okay.
It might also be me. I turned on voice activation.
No, it's not you.
Oh,
Okay, we are
Test,
good.
test,
Yep, everything.
test, 1, 2, 3.
All right, perfect. That's better.
Okay.
I'll
anyways,
just edit around that in post. It's not even a big deal.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of times it can feel bad when you sort of learn
Can I take this?
the 10 button Mortal Kombat fatality or whatever that you need to do for healing. But like one thing I found was very interesting. I know not everyone knows about healers, but this season Resto Shaman had like a very, very weird build and raid where essentially you're just spamming more or less like 2 buttons with Riptide and Wave. But still, you notice like a huge difference between healers just being able to like know when to Cloudburst and to like maximize your movement and not use globals. Like there was a time when we played with Dryny in like a random, you know, 6 boss mythic pug or whatever, and he's just like absolutely blasting on healing on his alt Archon because Dryny's obviously a monster and he's a little bit of a patter too, but you know, he'll take credit for that. And it's like, I think people don't like underestimate. Now, it has to be the right buttons, right? Like you can't have, like not all buttons can have that level of skill, but I do think that people underestimate that, like how in-depth a class can really be and how much skill expression there can be with very few amount of buttons, as long as they're the right buttons, you know?
What do you guys think about talents? I mean, like, are talents really the thing that's to blame here? Because I feel like this started with, like, really the Dragonflight talent tree revamp.
No, well, yeah. What do you think about
Mm.
talents, Ellie? What do you think about the Dragonflight talent tree versus like the old mop system or whatever?
I think that the concept of the Dragonflight talent system was correct, but it did not get the love that it needed. In order for a talent system like that to work, you have to have a lot of dedication to it, and you have to give it a lot of love and a lot of detail. And the problem is they put in, at least the way it feels from my perspective, the amount of effort put into to make the talent trees engaging and interesting and impactful and full of unique choices was similar to the amount of effort that they put into the old talent trees that had like 1/5 the amount of talents. And because of that, we ended up with a huge amount of just either dead talents or talents that just were completely non-engaging, like, you know, raw modifiers like X amount of crit or X amount of haste or whatever. And so while I think that the concept behind the Dragonflight talents was correct, and I do think that that was the right way to go, in order for them to go that way, they had to have put a lot of time into it, and they just didn't do that. And so we ended up with a lot of half-assed talent trees that, you know, do a disservice to a lot of specs and end up creating this bloat that we see now. So, yeah.
It feels like it was almost made for leveling, right? Like, it feels like those little nodes of like, oh, 2% haste or, you know, 10% more damage on barrage are just so useless, except for leveling. Like, you know, if you level up and you press it and you feel like you get something, but I just think that leveling has gone by the wayside as such a small part of WoW that they really should just not even worry about it. But maybe I underestimate the amount of people that just enjoy leveling characters, or that's like a majority of their time playing the game. I'm not sure. But that's always been my theory, is like all those nodes have to do with like trying to make the leveling experience better and don't really exist for endgame.
I think people underestimate how much like people didn't like the old talent system because it was too easy. But realistically, the issue with the old talent system was it just never got updates, period. Right? Like there was just dead talents for expansion after expansion. So in a similar way as to how like Blizzard or people thought that like, oh, I hate affixes. You know, the actual answer is we hate bad affixes. Similar to this, is just like we hate bad talents. Talents are good. It's just we hate bad talents.
Ooh, now talk about affixes, Ellie. Yeah. Sorry, we wanted to go back on that because here's my thoughts. Because Ian, so we went over an interview last pod where Ian basically said that he heard an overwhelming amount of feedback from everybody in the community that they hated affixes, and they removed affixes only for the 12 plus crowd and then kind of kept it for everyone else, and now it's completely silent. And he was basically trying to say that like a lot of people just echo the sentiments of a lot of the streamers and content creators rather than like, you know, actually critically think about their own experience. But I sort of think that I didn't think that was necessarily like genuine, and I feel like the affixes were just bad. But I'm interested to hear like your thoughts on the current affix system, and then like also back to Fellowship too, like how Fellowship does affixes, and if is there anything we can learn there? Like, do you see a world where we get affixes back in WoW? Or
first off, I'm gonna sound super out of touch right now, but isn't there only one affix a week right now?
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, the way it works
and then
they
Fortified
added
and Tyrannical, right, at like 7 and 10.
Right. So it gives you so a +2 key actually doesn't even have an affix on it. It's just literally nothing. And then
so
eventually
it's only
it gets
like +6 or something through 12
like
that has
4,
one
I
affix
think.
per week, right?
Yes.
It's 4. 4 is when you get the weekly affix, I think, right? And then 7 you get Forward Tyrant, I think, and then 10
So
you get
Yes.
the
And then-
other one.
So originally, when I talked about affixes, one of my proposed changes was just making it one affix a week, because the issue with affixes was always that there was just too much focus on the affixes and not enough on the dungeon. When you cut in half, so there were two things. One, the old affixes were pretty awful. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna try to sugarcoat
That's
it.
real.
That was definitely the biggest problem. But number two is also with 2 affixes per week, there was so much attention being put on the affixes and so little on the dungeons. When you cut that in half and you just make it 1 affix per week, and you also make the affixes not only more like engaging and more friendly and easier to handle, but also have more like kiss elements to them, then it becomes a lot less of a burden and a lot less overbearing. And so, yeah, of course, there's going to be way less complaints, not only because affixes were removed above 12, which I do think was a great decision, but also like under 12, the fact that it's just the amount of shit that you have to deal with is cut in like 70%. Like, that's why you're not hearing about it, because it's way less of an issue. In terms of affixes and Fellowship, though, the reason affixes and Fellowship work so well is because they did something that we had been asking WoW to do for a very long time, which was look at the seasonal affixes that worked, that people really liked. What did they all have? They all had some sort of kiss element to the curse. There was always both sides. So every time you had a shitty affix, you got something that it enabled, some type of gameplay that it enabled, whether it was through, shrouds or like going under the map and being able to route differently, whatever it might have been, whether it was prideful and playing around, a big damage buff, whatever it might have been, as long as the affix wasn't too obnoxiously punishing, like thundering, for example.
Yeah.
There was the positive aspect of it was always what made people more engaged with seasonal affixes than they were ever, and more attached to seasonal affixes than they ever were to regular affixes. And so what Fellowship does great is they take that concept and turn it into all affixes. So every affix in Fellowship has a curse, but it also has a kiss element to it that you can play around. So whether it's, binding ice, trying to get your ice to be, binding ice, for example, it'll root you and it'll deal a bunch of damage to you. However, it also deals that damage to mobs, and it scales really well with key level. So your strat is like, okay, I have to deal with this, so I have to personal, but I also want to get into melee and try to get as many enemies hit with this as possible, so I can do a bunch of damage to them. And so it's engaging to play around, and it's rewarding to play around. Whereas affixes in WoW previously were very punishing with engagement that was always negative rather than positive engagement. And that's where I think that WoW went really wrong with affixes.
Something that's also different about Fellowship than World of Warcraft whenever they had affixes is like the WoW affixes, it rotates and all dungeons for that reset have the exact same affixes, where Fellowship's affixes are contingent on that dungeon and that level, right? Where, if you're doing a dungeon on a, 12, that dungeon might show back up on a 15, but it's going to have completely different affixes on it. And that can change the texture of how the dungeon feels to play too, where I don't think that would be particularly good with how people play World of Warcraft, but it does give you a different feeling for like what you're doing in Fellowship.
Yeah, I kind of think that was, to me, the biggest problem with making the WoW affixes kiss curse was the balance side of it. So basically, there's no denial that certain affixes in Fellowship are much, much better than others, but you don't really care, right? Because it's like you don't really have a choice. It's not like, well, I'm going to come back next week when the affixes are better. The affixes for that dungeon at that level are always the same. And I think that's something that I've kind of mulled around in my head that is sort of interesting. I'm interested at how it plays at a high level. I know both Tettles and Ellie, both you guys have. I kind of cut off, like I basically got to max gear and I kind of dabbled in like the high 20s, but I never really like pushed super serious stuff. But I think both of you guys are like in the top 10 or 20 on the leaderboard, right? So do you think, is it still holding true where you're like not really minding the affixes being imbalanced and you're kind of just like playing with what you get when you do high level stuff?
So you just kind of look at the dungeon and you're like, what is the highest level of that dungeon that we can do? And then you go get score from that. It's actually kind of a different thing because you'll see a dungeon and you'll say it's a 45 with terrible affixes, but then the 47 of that has like stone skin and empowered minion on it or something like that. You're like, okay, we're going to go do that on the 47. We're not even going to bother doing it on the 45. Or it might not even be doable on the 45. Say it's got like some like malevolent shade mobs get like a DR whenever, like periodically, that are just like a huge time loss. You're like, that dungeon might not even be doable, but you don't care because some dungeons just are not going to be doable until either you have to go down a couple of key levels to be able to get your score from it, or you have to be able to go up to the next breakpoint. But that's fine because all players are kind of limited by that same restriction. At least that's my read on it. I don't know if Ellesmere shares a similar sentiment.
Yes, I absolutely do. I think that there's a few things that also make affixes less punishing. The first is that, but the second is that keys don't deplete. And because of that, you can run the same dungeon over and over and over and over and over again and really figure out exactly how to counter that affix or play around that affix in a positive way. And this is actually something that I've been vocal about in the past about WoW. I was actually in the crowd of, I think that Resil is a better system than just keys not depleting at all. And I am
Ooh.
happy to say that I was very wrong.
Oh,
He's
all
so
right, all
based.
right.
He's so based.
I absolutely could not have been more wrong. Keys not depleting is the greatest thing of all time, and it doesn't actually so for me, I thought Resil was a good system because it allowed people to maintain the competitiveness of like this key actually matters and we have to lock in kind of thing. But honestly, it like all that it does is it makes depleting keys feel super fucking punishing and feel awful and create a lot of negative energy with you and your friends. And all that you really gain is nothing because when I complete a key, even if it's after 30 tries and I like min-max the fuck out of the key and then we finally get it, it's just as good of a feeling as when I do a key and then deplete the key and then get that homework done and then get the key again 5 times in a row and then finally we time the key. The feeling is no different. I feel just as good about myself and my accomplishment completing that key that wasn't depletable as I did the key that was depletable. And so yeah, I definitely was wrong about that, and I love keys not depleting, and I hope that WoW looks at that.
I
What do
will
you think? What do you
say,
think about the incredible difficulty of the key? Like, I feel like you get to a point of key level where the difficulty is really, really high, and you're like very stuck, right? Like, I feel like if before you would still do really hard keys, but like generally it wouldn't just be like deplete on the first pull or the first two pulls over and over. But it feels like with Resil, it's like you go into Priory and you actually just prog the first pull like it's MDI. Do you still have that experience? You don't mind it as much? Do you think it's like worth the downside, or like I guess how do you feel about that?
I think that varies a lot based on the group and what the group's goal is. I think that for some groups it definitely does that, and I don't love that. But also the reason that it works so well in Fellowship is because dungeons are so short. So in WoW, when you have these like 30-40 minute dungeons, if you're having to run them over and over and over again, it's frustrating because you can get 25-30 minutes into a dungeon and you wipe, and then it's like, shit, we just lost all that time and now we gotta go again. In Fellowship, you're like 5 minutes in and you're halfway done with the fucking dungeon. And it's like you are able to front load all this stuff because there really isn't much else, like you get done with the dungeon in 10 minutes. And so I think that shorter key lengths play a huge role in that issue that you're talking about very specifically, in terms of it feeling like a slog. I think that as long as WoW does have 30-40 minute dungeons, that it will retain that problem, and may not ever be able to adopt a full no key depletion technique the way that Fellowship has, simply because you're right, it will suck to have that same atmosphere, but in a dungeon that's 4 times as long.
yeah,
I have a quick question of Fellowship. Are you allowed to skip key levels in Fellowship?
kind
You're
of.
allowed to skip key levels? What do you
Yeah.
mean?
Like if
Well, so
over
the way it
7
works is
go,
you
go.
get let's say you have a level unlocked, right? So like let's say I have up to 7 unlocked.
Yeah.
And so when I go to do a 7, I have certain options. So it'll be like, okay, do you want to do Priory with bursting, or do you want to do Stone Vault with quaking, or do you want to do Dawnbreaker with tyrannical, right? And then that's
Yeah.
it. And you have to
But-
beat one of them. And
Okay,
if you
so but like I
time
can't
one
go
of
straight to a
them,
9.
yes, correct. You have to time one of them at an 8, but it's resilient and you can do any of them. So, for example, if it's a really, like, you could technically never do a Dawnbreaker and get all the way to plus 40 if you wanted to, right? You could just skip and do, you get, at each key level, you have several options, but you don't have every option. So it's not like you can only do Eco Dome over and over and over to do 21, 22, 23, 24, right? You have to do one of the, is it 3 or 4 dungeons? I don't remember that are
4.
provided to you.
So
Yeah.
it's 3 regular dungeons and then 1 big dungeon.
Yeah.
You can choose any of them. If you choose the big one and you time it, then you do skip a key level. You go up 2.
Oh, so
Whereas
that's what
if you
that is.
choose,
Okay.
yeah, if you choose one of the short dungeons, then you only go up 1 key level.
Yeah,
Okay,
I was
the
going to say
reason
one
I
thing I'm
asked that-
definitely, or sorry, go ahead.
The reason I was asking is mostly just because, like, I don't know if that could even work in WoW, just because the ability to skip key levels in WoW. Because if keys didn't deplete, then I could be, relatively fresh and just jump into a Night Teeth Growl, and we could try that as many times without, any chances, even if Growl hasn't timed it or something. And I think Blizzard is really, really scared of allowing people to keep keystones that they do not deserve.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. I can't join a group that has unlocked plus 35 if I have only unlocked plus 2. So the
Right,
group
that's
is
what I
tied.
mean.
Yeah. The group is tied to the lowest player's unlock.
Yeah.
So if that player has only unlocked plus 2, then everybody in the group can only do plus 2.
Yeah. I think like Blizzard would need to do something similar with Mythic Plus if they were to make non-depletes.
I don't think that. I think that the way that Mythic Plus dungeons and Fellowship dungeons work is like so different that it's
Yeah.
very difficult to compare the two. And it's like I think that
agree.
once you start integrating, I think that like to make any real changes, you would have to completely change like the structure of how the game functions. Because I also think that the reward structure from Fellowship is heavily tied into how the game plays, and the reward structure from World of Warcraft dungeons is also tied into how that game plays. And everything would have to move if you're trying to move it from one way or the other.
Yeah, I think it's definitely Keystones reimagined, which I'm not necessarily against, but it changes the foundation so much, right? Like in Fellowship, it is like, what is your unlock? What is your level? Where are you at? Whereas WoW is much more like, like Squishy said, they couldn't really do it with the current system. One thing I wanted to add too about the resilient note that, very, very rare that I admit that I'm wrong on the podcast, and very rare that I admit that I like Resil keys, but I'm sure that Ellie or anyone else can vouch for this. Like, I had a big concern that with Resil keys, that you wouldn't necessarily have that excitement or that hype when you get to the end of a key. But I feel like, eventually you just get to key levels where it's so freaking hard that you still don't care. Like, it could be a Resil key, but you're still so excited about, like, timing that key when it's like, a 20 priory or a 21 priory or whatever. And it's like, I guess Ellesmere might not know what it's like to be provided for because he's always at the top level of groups. So he never actually is doing a priory for score where it's Resil. So he might not know that feeling. But
Ellesmere is the provider.
Yeah, for Jamie personally, I'm still hype as hell when I get to the end of a priory, and you get that feeling of like, everybody's nervous and you're way overcoming everything and saying shit that you don't need to say because everyone's locked in, and that definitely still happens with Resil keys as long as it's like at the right level of challenge and stuff. So I do want to say that like that was a concern that I had, and it's like either you're on my side where you get to a point where eventually that's true, or you're on Ellie's side where you're on the cutting edge to the point where you're not doing a Resil priory for score. It has to be a real key anyway. Do you think it would be a better system if you could do Resil keys, Ellie, if you could just try the priory over and over again that you needed the 21 or whatever?
I do think that if Resil keys were +1 higher than what you could do, like for example, right now you only get the current level. So like if you do all 19s, then you have Resil 19. But I think if you do all 19s, they give you Resil 20. I think that would be way better because then I think I don't know. I think it would just I think the game would feel a lot better to be able to progress like that. It would be way less punishing. I think that the thing that always burns me out of M plus every single time without fail, it's never me like trying to push a key. Like it's never me like playing at a cutting edge level and like trying to like do something, but it's literally always homework keys. Homework keys. Every single time I gotta slog through some bullshit key that I've done 600 times just to get the key that I actually want.
Yeah.
It just kills my motivation to play. And I think that that is definitely something that I would love to see change. But I don't know if, like I said, I would also be concerned about that, and I don't know how it would play out given the dungeon lengths. I would be a little bit concerned with that, and like you said, making these 30-40 minute dungeons MDI style practice where you just run it again if anything goes wrong, but you're like 25 minutes in, like, I don't know.
I
That might
think
feel like shit. But I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't. That's
Ye-
something that I hope they try like play around with, and then maybe we could see if it feels good or not.
I think WoW seasons are also, they're supposed to be twice as long as Fellowship seasons too, and creating that replayability on World of Warcraft seasons. I mean, I think that the longer dungeons and the a little bit more difficult grind is just kind of a part of the function of how do you create more replayability in a longer term. Because I think if you get people to dungeon cap too quickly in WoW, then people are going to stop. And that doesn't mean like the actual dungeon cap, like whatever key Ellesmere is doing doesn't mean that that might be the dungeon cap like on the season, but that might not be that person's dungeon cap. That person's dungeon cap might be a 14 or a 15. And if you're able to get there too quickly, that can also cause different problems with retention. But is that a bad thing that players are stopping earlier? I think the answer is yes, but at the same time, maybe WoW needs to do something more innovative with the game. Maybe that's more of a game problem than a system issue.
Yeah,
I don't even know.
I think it's interesting as the WoW scene is like evolving. One thing that was really funny is the reaction to Resil keys for the first 2 seasons of this game was, we just need to go hard and play 24/7 and like do the craziest shit, and we're just like misery Resil farming in LFG, and like people are selling their Resil keys, and it was like title in season 2 was one of the craziest things ever. Like I, as someone who like can play with really good people and like have a lot of experience on Plus, the battling that I had to do to get my mage into title, granted I'm not the best mage player, but like getting title, like if you got title in season 2 of War Within, like you're a pretty fucking good Mythic Plus player, or you spent an insane amount of time, but likely both.
Or gold.
But yeah, or gold. Okay, yeah, you can buy it with gold too. That is true. I will say though, it's interesting that this season now it's sort of proving that, well, okay, well, I think it's kind of like, I don't know how to quite explain it, but like it's going back to normal. Like people aren't necessarily just ramming their heads into the wall. Like they kind of just get where they want to get in the season, and then they're sort of taking a break and playing other games or waiting for the expansion or whatever. It does feel like it's kind of returning to normalcy a little bit, and like people are, I think the Resil keys are sort of finding a way into, like, people are getting used to them, right? In the same way that a lot of people are worried about the add-on change, and I would say, oh, you're just worried about change. I think I was a little worried about change with the key system, and it's like kind of just returning back to normal, and it's kind of like pretty similar to how it was before. There's like the few elite level groups that are still like really trying to push the edges in the same way that there were before, but like most people don't really like just do that all day every day.
I think WoW just in general is getting shorter and shorter. So
yeah,
yeah, maybe.
I mean, they are.
Maybe the game just. I feel like the game just doesn't suck right now. Like I feel like the game is really good, and War Within is a really good expansion. But we're just done. Like we're just ready for new content.
The
like,
longevity
I
is way shorter.
also think that this season in particular, the choices to bring back those existing dungeons, especially the ones from last season, was
Priory.
that was a bad choice. Yeah, Priory, Floodgate, and then also Dawnbreaker with all its bugs. Like, I don't know. That shit just killed my motivation this season. Like, I kept trying to be motivated, and then I'd step foot in those same dungeons. I don't know if I've just been spoiled by having new dungeons every season, but damn,
Yeah.
I did not want to step foot in fucking Floodgate and Priory for the 7,000th time in the last 6 months.
That's what I was gonna say. How funny is that, right? Like me and you both were in the trenches, like throughout BFA and Shadowlands, literally playing the same freaking dungeons over and over.
9 months.
Years.
9
And now
months.
it's like now it feels like too much when a dungeon is back for 2 seasons in a row. Now it's like, oh, this dungeon again for 2 seasons. When before it was like, it was what a good change that was. That's all I have to say. I guess is like we might be spoiled, but what a good change it was to make this dungeon rotation.
Absolutely agreed.
Yep. I think that we're all on the same thing. I think that It's hard because I don't even know if I can put my finger on it, but something about the season, and it happened around the time that Turbo Boost came out. I don't actually think it has to do with Turbo Boost, but it was about that time. Nobody like everybody was no longer logging in. Everybody was like, all right, I'm over this season. I'm just not gonna play.
Turbo Boost actually had a big effect as well, because I know tons of people that were just like, why are we pushing when we're about to have plus 12 item level in like 3 weeks, you know? It's like everything that we do is just going to be voided. And that is something that we didn't have to deal with in the past. Like, you got your BIS, and then everything that you did from there on out was relevant. Whereas, at least for that season. Whereas now, like, you get your BIS, and then it doesn't even feel that impactful, because you know that everything that you're doing is about. And then you also had shit like the fucking belt or whatever.
Yeah.
Which just
That
added
was so
another
troll.
layer of like, okay, well, everything we do is useless yet again. And then you've got all the seasonal bullshit buffs that came in, and it's like, okay, well, now what's the point of even pushing keys until the Christmas event when we get +5 versatility? And I don't know. There have been all these. There have
What
been
was
all
that
these.
one where it was like 3% crit or whatever? You had to do
The
the bonfire.
Garrison
There was like
Oh,
festival of fire or some shit. Yeah.
Oh,
But
shit.
anyways, my point is there have been so many things that Blizzard has been adding in order to artificially create content and like get people to log back in. And I understand why, but what it's done is it's adversely affected a lot of things in terms of like people's interest in pushing the game to its limits prior to those limits being available, because you just know that those limits are going to be gone soon, and so everything feels useless before then. So I think that's created a pretty big point of frustration for players early season, when you used to have a lot of people like really excited to like push and be like, let's see how fucking hard we can go and how high we can get with the gear that we have. And now it's just like, man, what's the point? So I don't know. I think that's definitely also led to this early season exodus of M+.
It kind
Plus
of reminds
game.
me a little bit of like, you know, at the end of Shadowlands when they did the what did they call the season 4?
Faded.
Like faded or whatever. Like at the end of Shadowlands, it was so cool when they did that, right? It was like, oh, you can do all the raids and this, right? But then when they did it again in Dragonflight, it was kind of like, this again? Like, I don't really want to do this. Like, why is there a new season? Why do I get, Turbo
Yeah.
Boost kind of felt that way, where the first Turbo Boost they did last season was like, oh man, everyone all of a sudden is logging in and playing, and we're all excited, and it was a surprise. And now it's kind of like, now that we know it's coming and we've already done it before, it felt like it didn't quite have the same magic that it did the first time. And I'm kind of interested to see if they go literally, I said it on the pod. I think like the first Turbo Boost, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. Like they're gonna do this every season now. And now I'm kind of wondering, maybe they don't. Like maybe they go into the next midnight, and I probably was the same thing about Faded, where I was like, oh, Faded was super great, and now I guess I kind of just see the parallels there of like, it was so cool when they do it the first time, but as soon as they stop, like as soon as they keep doing it and you know it's coming, it's a lot less exciting.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
Squish, you have something to say?
No.
I think that WoW suffers from, like, if it gets too formulaic, it's a lot less fun to play. And I think that kind of is the same thing with the gearing process that we've been seeing lately too, where it's just like, if you know exactly like what to do with your gear from the very start of the season to throughout the entirety of the season, it's less enjoyable. Same thing with like 8 boss raids every single season, it's less enjoyable. And that's kind of why, at least in my opinion, the rotating dungeons is such a hit, because like, the fact that you don't have the exact same 8 dungeons for a year and a half, like, that's why I stopped playing Shadowlands. It's because I'd already played all of Shadowlands in season 1, and I didn't need to play the other seasons of it.
What if
How
they?
have you guys dealt with that whole idea in Fellowship of like being at the top and doing like cutting edge content, but at the same time not having like, oh, I'm just gonna go to the class Discord and look at the Sims and see what the best like. Are genuinely either of you guys confident that you could say, okay, these are the best stats, these are the best gems, these are the best talents?
And I love
right?
that.
Yep. Super cool, right? Super cool.
Yeah. That's like my favorite. That people constantly coming into my chat and being like, "Yo, what's best in slot for this?" or "What's the best?" I'm just like, anyone that tells you definitively like what gems are best or like what, just ignore them. They don't know what they're talking about, because the truth is that the best players in the world have no fucking idea. We're just trying shit. like everybody at the 45, 50 level, like everyone is changing builds every day,
Yep.
and everyone's changing gems every day, and it's like nobody knows what they're doing. I certainly have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just trying different shit, and it's a lot of fun. It's so much fun to not have everything solved for you.
Yep.
And to just be able to be free with what you're doing, and not have a machine just say, okay, this is what's best.
It is so boring to be optimal. At that point, you're just checking off boxes on a checklist to be done.
Yes.
And that is what WoW has turned into, and it is what WoW will stay at. I have no doubt that if Fellowship continues, as it continues to get more optimized, it is going to become less and less fun because everything is going to be solved. You are going to know the exact
Absolutely.
path to complete the dungeons. Like your 7 of one dungeon is going to be easier of the other dungeon. Your rotations are going to become more optimized. Your talents are going to become more optimized. That information is going to spread quite quickly, and it's going to become the exact same problem as WoW because people's desires to be optimal is way too high, and the devs cannot make changes fast enough to stop people from being optimal. So, like, what can you fucking do there? As to the other point, like, I think Fated would be cool if they did like a 10-man returning raid, just like Dungeons, just make it 10-man.
10-man
That would
raid.
be really cool, actually. Unironically, 10-man raid would own.
Like, you know the Blackrock Depths raid they brought back last anniversary that like no one played because it didn't award loot? Bring that back as 10-man, everybody would enjoy it. Like, people would love it. It was a great raid, but nobody did it because there was no loot and it was 20-man.
Yeah,
So.
I think that was like unanimously, if you talk to anybody that played Fellowship 2, one of the like best, most obvious parts that like if WoW introduced this, it would be a huge banger, would be the short dungeons, right? Like the 10 to 12
Oh my
minute
gosh.
short dungeons, one boss. Like, it's funny that, Dorky made that analogy, is like that's what Delve should have been, Like, I agree that going into a dungeon, finding a party, getting a keystone, like planning a route, like this is a big undertaking, and every time you log into WoW, you don't necessarily want to do that, but you may want to play your character in challenging content. And Delves is nice because it's like solo and flex party. Like, that's the benefit of Delves, is you can just play it by yourself. You can just like go AFK halfway through and do whatever. But I think a lot of people do want to do like, challenging, tough stuff. Like, I think mini dungeons or short dungeons is like definitely like, I don't know, just give it just a little bit. Just give us a little bit, Blizzard. Like, just put out like 1 or 2 for fun, like mini dungeons, like, in this expansion, and just see kind of how it goes. I would really, really love to see that.
All right. Let's talk about add-ons.
yeah. All right. Enough being friends.
Let's talk about some divisive shit. So, add-ons are obviously getting changed in Midnight. Ellesmere, I think, has been one of the people that is the most outspoken in favor of the status quo in regards to add-ons. Eden Hezekosis did release, he was talking about what's going on with add-ons in the future. And one of the things that he basically stated, I think it was on a Reddit post, that Blizzard's philosophy on the add-on purge, that the main goal of the add-on changes in Midnight is that add-ons should not offer more features than the base UI. All right.
He put it on Reddit.
Yeah, this is weird that he posted on Reddit.
2 years.
Watcher Dev or whatever his name is.
Yeah. 2 years. It was like crazy to see that pop up, but yeah.
I guess the first question I have for Ellesmere is just like, what are your thoughts on add-ons as a whole? I guess just so everybody can kind of understand your POV.
Well, first I want to clarify something.
Yeah, that's a broad question.
I'm definitely not just like pro add-ons in any way.
Okay.
I think that there are a lot of things that add-ons do that are very crucial and important to this game's health. But I also think that there are a lot of really, really horrible downsides to add-ons that have to be addressed, even though it's going to be painful in the short term. So it's a little bit less like I'm not really on like one side or the other. And I know that kind of sounds like I'm, towing the line, but the truth is that both sides have points, and I'll try to succinctly summarize it as best as I can. Basically, The downsides to add-ons. Obviously, there are many things with combat add-ons and weak auras in general that have gotten way too out of hand. I could tell you recently, just with the development that I've worked on with weak auras, I've been working really hard on weak auras the past like year or two on Lua coding and figuring out everything that you can do. And let me just say, you can do the craziest shit with weak auras. We haven't even cracked the surface of what you can do with weak auras. If WoW was as popular of an esport as League of Legends or some shit, there would be the most psychotic weak auras made for this game. It's inconceivable. And so the truth is that weak auras and add-ons in general did have too much access to too much information from the game. And what that ended up creating was a lot of miserable experiences with Raid that we've seen with, you know, the giant liquid packs, weak auras, Northern Sky, whatever it is, whichever raid pack your guild uses. The whole everybody has to have the same version. There's constantly updates. You know, the fights just play themselves for you. That is all very true. That is all very, very true. There is a lot of pain and stuff that just drives me absolutely insane. And I am totally fed up with raid weak auras. Let me tell you,
Okay.
I am done with them. I never want to install them again. That being said, we can't also talk about weak auras and add-ons and stuff without also talking about the accessibility that they bring to so many people. One of the things that I've discussed is how differently people's brains process information. And what add-ons do is it allows people whose brain process information differently from other people a way to customize the same information that they would be getting, but just display it in a different way. For example, for me, the way that my brain works, I operate really well with audio cues, but I operate really poorly with visual cues. So a lot of the times people will hear my stream and they'll hear all these sound cues.
It's the
whether
shotgun.
yeah, whether it's the shotgun frontal or whether it's, you know, the phone ring dispel, whatever it might be. Audio cues have always played a big part in my ability to play the game at a high level and to interpret information being processed from the game. Now, whether or not that is information that Blizzard wants us to be able to access via weak auras is a whole separate question. But without weak auras and without add-ons, it very much makes it so that people can only interpret the information the way that Blizzard wants you to interpret it. And so people whose brains operate differently than others may not be able to customize their UI or may not be able to customize alerts or whatever it might be to be the display or the sound or whatever it might be that works for them. And instead they just have to use what Blizzard gives them. And that is where you run into issues with accessibilities, whether that's with disabilities or impairments, or whether that's just, you know, like I said, the way people's brains work. Sure. There's a lot of different things in this game that people use add-ons for, an insane amount of things. And the restrictions that Blizzard has put on a lot of these APIs have gone well past what many of us expected it to be, because a lot of us expected this to target those more aggressive, outrageous, egregious examples of weak auras that you see in Raid, but not affect everyday stuff that, you know, so many of us have come to rely on in terms of how we see the world. And so I think that that is the biggest concern for players, is that Blizzard has gone past what they said they would, and now there's all these sort of restrictions that are going to completely reimagine how people view the game. And whether or not that's good or not now lies solely in the hands of Blizzard. So before, we had decades of community-driven help and support, which allowed so much customization. And now instead, it's all going to be in Blizzard's hands. And that's definitely concerning to people because, let's face it, Blizzard doesn't always have the greatest track record in terms of following through on, okay, they say they're gonna do this and they do that, but maybe they don't do it exactly the way they said, or maybe they don't put enough dev time into it because they're spread too thin, whatever it might be. And that's okay, but it's not okay if they are taking away the ability for the community to fix those problems And instead they're like, okay, we're the only ones who can fix it, but we're also not going to fix it because we don't have the time to do it. So that's where you're going to run into big issues. And that's the big concern with us seeing currently, like where details is at, like the combat log, or sorry, the whatever it is, their version of details, and where nameplates are at and where party frames are at and all these things, we are now seeing that they are very far behind in terms of where we thought it would be relative to where it actually is this far along, especially since the expansion is launching in just a few months. So I think that there is growing concern that Blizzard will not be able to follow through on making these as in-depth as they need to be in order to address all of these potential issues that the community is going to have.
I will say, I think it's going to be difficult too for Blizzard to be looking to do that because everybody's. I mean, you call them issues, right? Everybody's issues are different with what they need
Absolutely.
out of the UI, right?
But that's the thing. That's what made Weak as an add-on so powerful, was that you have so many people with such wide-ranging ways of interpreting information. That's what add-ons in Weak allowed them to do, was to be able to interpret that in their own way. And so Blizzard is trying to take on this massive task, and like, I don't think that there's any way that they can do it. And that's not me saying Blizzard sucks. That's just saying this is a fucking huge task that they're trying to take on. And I don't think that they realized the depth and extent to which they were limiting other add-ons and how much it would actually impact the community. Or they did, and they just have a lot of faith in themselves, in which case, prove me wrong.
I mean, they keep walking stuff back. I mean, they've, even as of like last week, Blizzard's now continuing to add differences in terms of like aura filtering and whatnot, and starting to they're continuing to make changes based on feedback.
Well, they definitely are, but it just kind of feels like I know that they basically said, okay, we're gonna go nuclear, we're gonna nuke everything, and then we're gonna start adding stuff back as needed. But like their nuclear option was way more nuclear than most people thought. And they just destroyed everything instantly. So now they're adding stuff back, but I think they're adding too little stuff back too slowly. And if they don't start adding back some serious things like very soon, I don't think that we're going to have support for a lot of the add-ons, even if they eventually do add them back anyways.
So I think on the topic of accessibility or quality of life or what, I think those are broad overused terms. Specifically not talking about like people with disabilities or like severe problems, but let's call them the average gamer or whatever the hell that means. I kind of feel like having, like, you talked about like, oh, you're really good with sound cues or visual cues. I kind of feel like it allows them to create a textured game with different things where different people are good at things and bad at other things, right? Like, for example, like you might be insanely good at solving the Miss Maze really fast, or you might be like really, really good at this one specific thing or like these one specific bosses. And I kind of feel like when you can build add-ons around like always catering to what you want and what you can interpret the information, it kind of removes some of the texture and like the, oh, this is my weak point, or like, oh, this is what I'm really good at, when you can sort of just like make it pop up on your screen with a text-to-speech every time you need to do anything. Because what you said about we haven't even scratched the surface about weak is why that might have been a little bit of an exaggeration. It's definitely true in the sense that like, you can create a weak aura, for example, that like in Priory knows when you're being overlapped with a shout and a thunderclap and you have a defensive up and telling you what button you need to press to live. Like, you could be doing some crazy ass weak auras, but I guess I think that I don't necessarily see that as a strictly good thing. Like, if, oh, I'm really good at audio, so therefore I want to change literally every sensory in the game to audio so that I can be perfect with everything and react to it on audio. Do you see it that way, or do you think it just like it is the frustration or like the struggling? I guess it's hard to compare it to other games, but like I was talking to Evade about Overwatch today, and like I was talking about a specific hero and a specific map, and like, oh, my hero is really, really bad at this map, so I want to change. But he was kind of saying like, well, I actually kind of like playing a hero that's bad at this map because I have to think outside of the box and like problem solve or whatever, and it
That is
creates
so
these like,
Evade.
things.
That is
Right,
some Evade
but
shit.
whereas like I feel like while it's technically true that you're problem solving about with add-ons, I kind of feel like it's like a much less exciting problem solve situation. Sorry, I kind of rambled a lot, but I'm interested your thoughts on kind of like that's what I would assume Ian would say in response to what you said.
No, you're definitely right in a lot of ways, but I think that where we kind of got sidetracked was that when I'm talking about how I interpret information, I'm not actually talking about mechanics. I do think that mechanics visually carry. So I think that part of what made mechanics visually so much more engaging was when they made the change graphically to what you could actually see when like a frontal went off, right? The way that you can actually see the length of the frontal clearly and all that kind of stuff. And I do agree that it's okay for people to excel at different areas of the game and for people to use their brains, you know, different positives and negatives to certain advantages. So some people get advantages in some areas and some people will get disadvantages in other areas. And so I think that you're right about that, but I also think that there are certain roles that require different attention to different things that it's hard to create one universal system unless you put a lot of close attention to detail, right? So for example, healers have to look at raid frames, right? However, DPS players don't have to look at party frames or raid frames as much. They can focus on nameplates. So part of that logic was what Blizzard actually talked about this. They were like, okay, this is part of why we want to remove healer cakes because healers have to be focused on party frames much more, like their attention is much more focused on party frames than it is on nameplates.
Okay.
Right? Whereas DPS do have to be more focused on nameplates. And this is where Blizzard kind of lost me because they said that they want healers to be looking at party frames, but then when I was like, okay, well, are we going to get some sort of targeted spell, weak aura, where we can see the target of a certain spell on the party frame? And they said no. And then I'm like, okay, so then in order for us to actually know and do proactive healing, which is a huge part of healers kits, we have to look at the nameplate. So now we're already looking at nameplates, so why don't we get a fucking kick, you know? And so it's like, so is our attention supposed to be on the party frame? Is it supposed to be on the nameplates? Is it supposed to be on the visuals of the frontals and dodging the mechanics, or is it supposed to be on all three? And so my problem is that when you introduce a role whose attention needs to be more split than other roles, you also need to give that role a way to access information in another way besides just purely visual. So that is where audio cues come in for me, because let's say there's a frontal that doesn't have the greatest indicator, and somebody's health is spiking and my attention is on the party frame. If I don't have a good audio cue for that frontal, there's a good chance that I may not see it happening while my attention is on the player that's injured. And one of the things that Fellowship actually does really well is those big frontals and those big mechanics are often done very well via audio cues. On top of that, a lot of cooldowns and like major healer cooldowns are also done via audio cues. So the game auditorily is a lot more engaging and it allows for more play based on sound, which helps me as a healer a lot. So I do think that you're right that you shouldn't be able to just customize a UI entirely based on how your brain works, and you shouldn't be able to trivialize mechanics. And I do agree, all the text-to-speech bullshit. where it
Oh, the
just says,
text to
"Press
speech
this at
is
this time."
so bad. It's so bad.
100%. I absolutely am in full agreement. Do I use that? Absolutely, because it's available. No shot I'm not going to use it if it's available. But
It's
do I think
broken.
it's stupid? Absolutely. It's stupid. It's broken. 100%.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's interesting that two things. You talked about the texturing on the ground, and like the one thing I'm sure you noticed this as well. We brought up this idea is the tornadoes in Theater of Pain, like in the undead area or whatever. How in
Yes.
Shadowlands people would get hit by that. Like even in high keys, you would play with good players who would get hit by those tornadoes.
Yes.
And now when they brought back that dungeon and they added that telegraphing, you almost had to be a complete moron to get hit by that. Like almost nobody ever in any keys that I was in that season got hit by it, except for certain people that I won't name. I kind of worry, I guess, that does that mean the mechanic was bad, do you think? Or is that just like, I kind of worry that we're limiting their design space a little bit too much with add-ons, and like, is it really so bad that like, okay, this mechanic, you really have to stare at a mob? I definitely agree with what you're saying. My healer brain is starting to come back. I've been a DPS idiot for a little bit too long, but pulling the healer card and saying that I have to look at party frames, so therefore, like, it's way harder for me to look at nameplates is definitely a little bit true, though. One thing I was going to say about Fellowship, too, that I thought you were going to say is that the counter to that is in Fellowship, all the frontals are telegraphed, but the frontals in Fellowship are fucking huge. Like, there's no,
That
like,
is true.
right? So, like, they're challenging in a different way where, like, like, for instance, in the desert map or whatever with the mines, like, that frontal literally takes half of your screen. Like, you can't just be standing in no man's land, because if you're in the frontal, you're going to, like, die to that guy. And so I think that's an interesting take, right? Sorry, go ahead.
I do agree, but also what comes with the frontals being that big is it's much harder to miss. Like, the thing is, in WoW, like, for healers, if you're looking at frames or something, some of those frontals are incredibly not obvious and very like minor, and especially things like, okay, in Floodgate, before they added the extra thing for the flamethrower or whatever, it was like really not clear where it ended. It wasn't even clear when it would start, especially when you have 20 mobs on top of each other. It was just like super not obvious. So the flamethrower would just go out and you would just fucking die if you weren't like super locked in. If you were a melee, especially as a melee healer, like this is definitely a problem that's near and dear to my heart. And it's why I came up with the gunshot solution in the first place, was that it's just something that worked for me, because the truth is that being a melee healer, there's a lot to look for, and not a lot of my visual attention can be spent on the environment. So that's kind of it's not like I want to be listening to gunshots going off in my ears 24/7. Like, it's not like that's engaging for me. It's just kind of what I have to do because of the way that dungeons are designed. Whereas in Fellowship, I don't really feel the need for that, because the dungeons are designed with so much more intensely obvious mechanics, which doesn't even make them easier to deal with. It just makes it so that when my attention is more split, I'm still able to notice what's happening and react to it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that WoW should pick up on that part. Also, I think that's something
I think they have been, right? Like, that's like Season 2, when they introduced the new graphics, that was a big step in the right direction.
I think that there is still a problem with World of Warcraft graphics where you have shit like the Dawnbreaker ball. Like, it's like literally impossible to see like what's going on with any of that. But I also think that there's something that's, it is kind of tangentially related, but I think that the pace of what's just been going on with the game lately has also created a situation where players are more reliant on add-ons, because things just happen so quickly. And at some point you started out and it was Shadowlands, or maybe it was BFA, and you had the gunshot weak aura, and you would get like maybe 3 per dungeon, and then Shadowlands showed up, and okay, when we got 5 per dungeon, and then Dragonflight showed up and it's like 20 per dungeon, 3 per pack even, or something like that. You're just like, well, it started off as like something that was like, okay, this is kind of useful, and then it's like, okay, this is required. And I think that it's like, because of the pace of the mechanics and like how fast they're happening, but also what type of mechanics Blizzard keeps throwing at you as well, then that makes weak auras more required. And that's like kind of the chicken or the egg conversation too, where it's like, are weak auras required because the dungeons and raid fights are designed that way, or are the dungeon and raid fights designed that way because the weak auras exist? It's like it's really hard to answer, and I think it's probably both. I think the answer is probably column A and column B. But at the same time, it's like if Blizzard just drops us in Priory next season with no weak auras, it's not playable. The game is literally not going to be playable. So Blizzard's going to have to, the burden of responsibility is also on them. Like, it's actually pretty solely on them, as a matter of fact, since they're removing add-ons.
I
I
don't know why Blizzard. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I don't know why Blizzard hasn't just come out and like had a public interview, because all the stuff they've been doing right now regarding add-ons has been behind closed doors and like really and just like one-way blue posts, And I feel like there's a lot of questions that really need to be answered with almost like direct examples. Blizzard can keep saying, "Oh, we're gonna make the encounters easier. We're gonna do this." Like, we could take you at your word, or you could show us. Give us. We're gonna see the encounters in raid testing soon. We're going to see Mythic Plus soon. Give us the hard examples. There's this mechanic in the Void Spire. This is how it would have been with weak auras. Here's how we changed it. For the era of no weak auras, we added 4 seconds. This is the visual of it. It's very clear. Stuff like that. Like, you don't need to tell us how to do the boss fight, but give us that example. Similarly, talk about dungeons. This pack only has one caster and it casts one time every 15 seconds. It only has one frontal, and there's this really clear animation. Like, Blizzard can do so much more at convincing the player base that they got this. But they're saying jack shit.
Yeah.
And that's why this discussion is happening, because no one knows. We think it's right. You think it's bad. But the truth is, we don't know. We can only guess right now. And that speculation is literally tearing the community apart. And Blizzard has the tools to solve it. And they choose to do nothing.
It is speculation based off whether or not you trust Blizzard to make the right decision with their game or not, right?
But if you were Blizzard, why would you not just show us? Right?
Because
show
it
us
may potentially do more harm than good, I think.
Yeah, also they might not know.
I don't think they're ready.
They also,
I mean, we don't even have that.
They also could
damage
not know,
meters.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's the other big concern is like it's possible that they took on more than they thought. Like they just went nuclear and then they're like, oh shit, this we limited add-ons way more than we expected, and that's not only why they're trying to repeal stuff, but they may not be entirely sure exactly how much access they want us to have yet. And that's something that they're hoping to figure out in alpha with testing is like, okay, what are people struggling with? What do we need to open access back up to? And so I don't think they have like definitive answers for any of that yet, or else we probably would have heard for them, like you said. But I do hear what you're saying in terms of it. And Tettles, to your point, regarding like the Dawnbreaker orb, one thing I was thinking about was, wasn't that dungeon technically designed before the change to graphic settings?
Yes, it technically
the graphic
was.
settings happened in season 2, right?
But they updated some of the graphic settings, like the
They did,
walking
but
the walking
they don't
shadows.
always go back and-
Okay, but
and,
they
fix
changed
everything.
they changed that fucking orb to now target tanks this season for some stupid reason. Bad change.
That was so demonic.
Bad, terrible change.
Yeah,
Literally,
that was crazy.
But then they don't update the visual on it. It's literally impossible to see. Like I don't even look at like who the tether is on. I look at my unit frames because Cell tells me who it's targeting.
Yeah, I mean, my only point is that I think that there's a world where I'm not saying that was good. They absolutely should have updated the graphics and changed that. But I am saying that I think that it's possible that they that was just an oversight, and that they are designing dungeons now with the new graphics in mind, and that may lead to better designed dungeons, but we don't know. We really don't know shit until M Plus comes out on beta, which will be very interesting to see.
Dude, I mean, it's going to be cooked too, because it's not just Mythic Plus comes out on beta, but now since all the add-ons are like kind of closing down, or they're not willing to continue to develop going into midnight, there might not even be the ability to be able to test functionality of add-ons to be able to give appropriate feedback, because what add-ons are you testing? Weak auras are gone, LVY is gone, like a bunch of, I think Plater said that they were going to continue to stay around with limited functionality, but like a lot of add-ons like closing up, it's going to be hard to actually, what are we testing? Like what add-ons are we even testing?
Yeah.
Well, So I want to add though that we've been doing about add-ons and we haven't really talked about much, but Blizzard has actually loosened the restrictions a fair amount. I believe they did it at the beginning of this week, like
Yeah, they did.
right after our last podcast, basically. And I've mentioned that I've been like in talks with Terrathal and he's been fiddling with it a little bit, and actually things have gotten a lot better. So while there's still a lot of grounds to discuss and figure out, they like in my opinion, the whole like, oh, LVY is shutting down, weak ores is shutting down. I think it's very possible that they rethink that with how much that they've actually stepped back and changed things to the point where like, oh, they're really like changing things even further than I expected them to. Like I knew they were gonna walk back some stuff, but like they're talking about like, oh, we hear healers, we understand like that's going to be a problem. Like we're loosening restrictions on party frames to allow more add-on customization. They're adding like, better tracking for like defensives and stuff like that. Like they've really I don't want to say improved because they didn't really do anything other than lifted some of the restrictions, but I think that things have gotten better from what I've seen. And so Terrathal's been working on like a bare bones mock LVY sort of thing on beta, and like you can do like
You tested it?
wouldn't know. I haven't played it personally. Well, so unfortunately, actually, Terrathal doesn't have alpha yet. Like I think the
He gave it to me to
opening.
test today. I was messing
Oh
around with
yeah,
it
yeah,
earlier.
yeah. Oh yeah. So I haven't messed around with it yet. So I guess you you were playing with it. Do you have any thoughts on like the changes or like what's because you never really mentioned it, but I was like looking at what he's come up with, and I'm like, dude, they're like. This is almost indistinguishable from LVY, I think, for most people. No.
Okay, so what I will say, Terrathal not designing this add-on for other people. He is only designing it for himself to try to see what the limitations
subscribers of the bench only.
No, not like that. He's literally only designing it for himself. So, but like, I found it to be there are limitations. There's some weird stuff going on whenever you enter into a dungeon. So everything in Stormwind works as if add-ons no change. And then I zoned into a follower dungeon, and then some stuff was starting to get a little bit weird in regards to buff and debuff tracking and like targeted frames and stuff like that. But I think that he said that he believes that he's going to be able to get all of that like resolved. He thought that there was maybe some issues with like the secret value stuff, but he was going to be able to work through it. At the same time, I found it to be almost the exact same as LVUI from my user experience, which was, and then he also ended up adding in a resource bar and stuff like that into it as well, which I thought it looked good.
Yeah, like a lot of the big things that people were concerned about, I think, are being resolved. It's getting more and more like I think they're going to be winning over more and more percentage of people. Like I think there's always going to be some people that want more features or more this or more that, but if you're like on the fence or you like are like if you're like a big LVY fan, like you enjoy the fact that you download just like one pack, you don't have to worry about anything, like almost guaranteed there will be something like that, whether or not it's LVY continuing their project or another thing, like downloading an all-in-one thingy where like he basically had like actually a really cool feature that I haven't seen yet in UIs where you can like do one drop down and it changes all of your fonts for everything, like your party frame font, your plater font, your chat font, and same with like textures, like because that's one thing, right? Is like a lot of your UI will look really ugly if you don't have matching fonts and textures and stuff. And like I don't know, there's a lot of cool features there that are left on the table, but to just randomly derail again, I'm interested because you mentioned that you were a little bit disappointed that Floodgate came back. I'm not saying I'm a super Floodgate enjoyer right now, but I felt like their dungeon design principles have been really good lately. Like, I actually really like a lot of the War Within dungeons, and I think that Floodgate and Ecodome are both, like, pretty banger dungeons. What do you think, Ellie, about the current dungeon design? And, like, do you have, like, a certain era that you think that you're like, oh, this expansion's dungeons were best? Or, like, do you think that they're trending in the right direction? Or, like, what do you think overall, I guess, about the current dungeon design for M+?
I think every expansion has had banger dungeons and terrible dungeons. I don't think there's been any era of M+ really that just like exclusively had bangers. I do think that their dungeon design has been good for some of the dungeons, definitely. Floodgate would be one of them. I think Floodgate was very good design. For me personally, the frustrations with Floodgate It's more just that I think I got spoiled with just changing dungeons constantly, and I just didn't want to play the same thing again, you know? I'd grinded that for 6 months already. This was supposed to be a new fresh season, and something about doing the same dungeons again just doesn't feel fresh or new.
I agree with that.
So I think that was my issue with Floodgate. It really had nothing to do with Floodgate in terms of how good of a dungeon it was, because I do agree that Floodgate is a very well designed dungeon. Floodgate and Ecodome, incredible dungeon.
That was a good dungeon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of what makes Ecodome so good though is that it's just short. It's short. It's fast. It has good mechanical display. It's not overbearing in terms of interrupt requirements.
It has a lot of mobs that leap on you. I mean, that's a great design mechanic. They should continue to use that one in the future as much as possible, even.
Stop. Let's not go too far.
I mean,
But yeah.
I think just in the end, it just kind of is like the faded of Mythic Plus, right? Like it's like them bringing 3 raids back that everybody's already played. But I bet you, like Ellesmere, would you be hype if Floodgate came back 2 expansions from now? I bet you would.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, it was just a back-to-back, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, but it's like if they brought back a Dragonflight dungeon like this season, no, I need some time away, you know? I need to go explore.
Yep. Just enough time for Alg Academy to come back.
Oh
Woo!
my god. Absence makes the heart grow fonder or something.
Look, okay, no bolstering, no sanguine. How bad could it be? All right, you know, like
I fought Croth many a times. I can tell you it could be bad. I don't know. I actually like the dungeon a lot, I will say.
they're gonna add double the tornadoes on Croth. That's what's gonna.
I think if they with no affixes, and then if they stop the stupid snapping stuff that people were doing, generally I didn't mind snapping in dungeons, but Algathar's snapping was like really, really annoying with the way that like certain mobs would get stuck, or you would not pull the bees. I don't know. This is such a high-end problem that it doesn't really matter that much, but this is just me complaining. But like if they remove the snapping,
yeah, like either make snapping more accessible and easier, or just remove it entirely. One or the other.
It's so
like,
inconsistent,
the
like
whole
garbage.
Inconsistent. Yeah, it's so cringe. Couldn't agree more.
Okay. Let's talk about add-ons. Or not add-ons. I don't know why I said add-ons.
oh no, add-ons. So we're
No,
not
no,
trying to start the add-on conversation.
No. Let's talk about interrupts, because one of the big changes that's actually going into Midnight is the fact that healer kicks are getting removed again. The stated goal, I actually don't. Did they even state a goal for removing the interrupt? Or is it?
They basically they were just like, okay, so healers have too many responsibilities and roles, and we feel that the main, like, interrupting should mainly be at the responsibility of players who can watch nameplates more, which was part of my argument and frustration with the whole targeted spells thing, because but anyways, I digress. Basically, interrupting, where I stand with interrupting is that I'm not like, I think people misinterpreted my tweet when I talked about healer interrupts, because I talked about a lot more than just healer interrupts, and the problem was that people just latched on to the timing, I guess, with when they removed healer interrupts. Because that was right, like I tweeted right after that. But the problem was that what had precursed that was also the removal of a lot of other healer expression. So at this point, it was less that it's not that I'm attached to healers having interrupts. Even though I do prefer to have an interrupt, it wouldn't be a big deal if they hadn't grouped that change with a lot of other removals of healer skill expression. And so what I mean by healer skill expression, there's a lot of different ways that healers deal with skill expression. Here are a few. 1 is dealing damage. 2 is interrupting, CCing, stuff like that, helping the group. 3 is defensive coordination, whether that's shot calling for defensives or raid defensives, or whether that's just being in a pug and like seeing who has what defensives available and triage healing based on and trying to predict what people are going to use and stuff like that. There have been so many different layers of skill expression, and then obviously the most important one that I discussed, which was targeted spells. Being able to see what spell is targeting someone and react to it before that spell hits that player, whether it's with a shield or an external, or whether it's just pre-ramping on that player with hots, or whatever it might be for your given spec. There are so many different ways for healer skill expression in WoW that have developed over the years. And my problem with healer skill expression going into Midnight is that they have removed essentially everything except for raw healer throughput. And my frustration is that essentially turns M plus healing into raid, where it's just like, okay, I just want to do as much healing as possible. I don't get to help the team with damage. I don't get to help the team with kicks and stops. I don't get to help the team with shot calling, with defensives. I don't get to help the team with, pre-ramping on players and knowing who's going to be targeted by what and being proactive. I just react to the damage and heal, and that's it.
I feel like that's a little hyperbolic, no? Like, isn't that exactly how healing and fellowship is right now? Like, you wouldn't describe it as.
I think okay. So
there
are two things to healing and fellowship. So the first thing is that healing and fellowship is wildly different from healing in WoW because of the way that healing plays out, how impactful every one of your button presses is, which you don't get in WoW. Maybe if they made that the case in WoW, I might have a different opinion, like you're saying. But the big thing for me in Fellowship is that healers actually deal significant damage. So because of that, we have a way to express our skill outside of raw healing throughput. So once again, I'm not asking for all of these things. I just want some way to express my skill outside of raw healing power, because I already do that in raid. That's what raid is. That is a place where you get to express your skill as a healer via just raw healing throughput. But M plus was always supposed to be something different, where you got to showcase other talents. You got to showcase other things that you could bring to the table, other ways that you could help your team in a smaller setting, whether that's via damage throughput, whether that's via CC interrupt, all that kind of stuff, whether it's, from defensive coordination, any of that. And my problem has just been that WoW has, I think, like, for example, if healer damage actually started being a thing again in WoW, I wouldn't be saying shit about interrupts or anything. But it's not. They've made it pretty clear that they don't want healers to do damage. They don't want healers to look at nameplates, so they don't want healers to have kicks. They don't want healers to coordinate defensives. They don't want healers to be able to see what casts are going on players and be able to react like that. So when I talk about this, it's just coming from a place of wanting a way to express my skill outside of healing power.
It's tough because I feel like the average healer player is like, they want to be a heal bot. Like, they want to be like a follower. They want to be a literal follower dungeon healer. Like that is their ideal way of playing the dungeon.
Princess, Mercy main. That's every healer's class fantasy.
But here's the thing. I don't have a problem with that. And this is where I start to lose people, is that I think that is totally fine if people want to play that way.
Yeah.
And my problem is when people try to use that as a reason for them not buffing healer damage, or them not giving healers other tools to deal with other things. So basically in one version, you force every healer to play the way that the average healer wants to play, which is they only get to heal. And in the other version, you don't force anyone to do anything. You can still just be a heal bot passenger princess in 99.9% of key levels. This is an artificial problem that people make up. Like, I actually lost my mind the other day because a viewer was like, yeah, but I feel forced to deal damage as a healer in WoW in my plus 10 keys. And they were being unironic. And I was like, okay, so like 70 problems that I have with this, but we'll just start off with the fact that healer damage has been irrelevant in WoW for like 5 fucking years. Like healer damage has just been a complete non-factor since Ashen Hollow. And the whole concept of being forced to deal damage is literally just people watching streamers play and wanting to emulate their gameplay. And that's fine if you want to play that way. But that is not the average player. The average player doesn't know who any of us are. The average player doesn't watch Twitch. The average player doesn't watch streams. The average player doesn't care what the top end is doing or what is meta. That is our small niche. That is a very small subsect of the WoW M+ player base. And just the WoW player base in general. The average player is just a fucking healer that just passes your princesses through keys, and that's totally fine. There is nothing wrong with that. That's how most people play healer. That's how they played healer in Classic. That's how they play in retail a lot of the times. But forcing the healers that want to exercise their skill expression into and pigeonholing them into only playing that one way because that player doesn't feel like they want to have the pressure or the peer pressure of like, oh, this is what's meta, so I should be doing this. Like, that's just ridiculous to me.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
that
a mega base take. I just want to say the idea that people just create these problems in their head as to what they're expected to do or what they should do. That is so true.
I completely agree with that. But unfortunately, that's the reality we live in, right? Like all the way back to Shadowlands, the damage meta was very real, even at +10 keys or 20s back then. That you saw people who, if their healer just fucking healed during Prideful, they would time the key. But instead, they would just die to Prideful on a +20 key. And because it exists, people do feel pressured to do it. And then you have groups that say the dumbest shit, like, oh, your build sucks. Oh, you're a boomkin, you can't play, or any kind of ridiculous stuff. I mean, there's just a lot of gatekeeping that gets caused by allowing the skill expression that is absolutely caused by the community, but it also caused a very negative experience for a lot of people. And I think that's the part that Blizzard is having to worry about.
But but two things. One, that is the people that you're talking about is like a 0.01% of the player base. Like, you're talking about a +20 key in Shadow. Do you know how many, like, the percentage of people that did +20 keys in Shadowlands that ran into that issue? What?
Wasn't +20 in Shadowlands Vault?
Oh, I don't have any idea.
Well, I thought he was saying that, like, needed the damage, that the healer damage would have mattered. Not that got flamed, but that would have mattered.
Needed?
Apparently 15 was Vault, by the way.
They've
changed it a couple times, but yeah.
20 was Dragonflight, I guess. I don't know. I'm all over the place. 20 was Portals, I think. Anyways, I think that the problem is that we act like if we reduce healers down to just being heal bots, that DPS players won't just find a new fucking thing to flame healers for.
Yep.
They will.
That is
true. They
true.
always do.
Yeah.
There's no change that you could make to this game that would suddenly result in healers not being flamed.
Well, that's because
DPS
players are
mistakes.
That's because DPS players are fucking dumb. Like, I'm gonna be honest. That's because like the average DPS player is an absolute moron, does not know why they died, and then they blame the healer. Like, it's just the truth. Like, the average DPS player, they see that their health is 0, they go, "This goddamn healer didn't heal me," and it's just like there's no recognition as to what actually killed them. The thing that I see with healing is like healing is
a player. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, the thing that I see as a kind of annoying is like healer, the characters. Like, what does a disc priest do? What does a resto shaman do? What does a holy paladin do? They're almost designed with their kit to be like a support, yet they're expected to do the healing of an absolute god all the time. And it's just like, and then you're kind of run into these problems where it's like, okay, well, I have all these support tools and I should be able to do damage and I should be able to kick and I should be able to stop. But at the same time, I have to be able to do 5 million HPS to the entire group at the same time. And it's like, I think that there's a little bit of cognitive overload for the average player. Obviously, you're not going to struggle with this because you're Ellesmere, right? Rank 1 healer. But like the average healer, they're going to sit there and they're going to see their Blessing of Autumn and they're like, where do I put this Blessing of Autumn? And they see their Hodge, they're like, oh, I should Hodge this mob next. And it's just like, it's a lot to deal with while at the exact same time you need to be healing a trash pack.
Yeah, but I think we've completely diverted from the original discussion, which was healer damage. I'm not sure how any of that has anything to do with min-maxing healer damage and that the relevance of why the average player felt like a healer. Like, I'm saying, if if somebody is dumb enough to yell at their healer for not doing enough damage in 2025 in World of Warcraft, that same player is going to yell at the healer for literally anything else come midnight, regardless of if healer damage is buffed by 10 times or not. It doesn't matter. That type of player exists in every competitive game in existence. There will always be players who flame other players for community-based myths, like healers doing actual damage in keys. And the solution is not to remove the skill expression of healers and to limit healers' ability to expand their gameplay simply because of this small subsect of players that... Go ahead.
All right, I just want to tackle the counter argument here. I fucking hate kick rotations. You know, Blizzard, whenever they added healers, kicks to healers, they increased the number of casts that were in a dungeon. As a result, you know, the healer is kind of expected to be a part of the kick rotation, and they're adding kick rotations to mobs. I think that this is stupid. I actually don't think that interrupts should be designed this way. I think interrupts should be designed how they're designed in Ecodome, where it's just like, all right, you target this Farstalker, you press interrupt on Arcing Zap, it goes on cooldown, that's fine. The issue arises whenever it's just like you need to be able to have like 2 or 3 kicks in a rotation, and then you're relying on the healer to actually kick whenever they have so much other stuff going on. And I think that that's the annoyance of it, is like whenever Blizzard also designs the dungeons with 5 kicks in mind, it's just like, holy shit, please stop.
Yeah, but you also have to understand the other part, which is that healers, when they don't have a kick, not only feel like super fucking helpless, but if you isolate us in too many ways and remove and strip too many group play aspects from healers, then it doesn't even feel like we're playing the dungeon with our team. It just feels like we're playing our own mini game of watching health bars.
Well, it kind of is like that, though, right?
But it shouldn't be. I disagree.
Well, what group things does a BM hunter do? Like, I feel like you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that, like, I don't necessarily think it's that bad. Like, I think that there isn't really a support role except for Aug Evoker, so, like, healer is the closest thing, so it should feel like you're playing with your team, but I don't necessarily think that has to be it. Like, I think there's lots of other things that you can be aware and show skill as a healer, but your point was that you're not saying that it has to be kick. You're just concerned that they need.
I don't even care
something.
about healer. This myth came out that I'm just like the most pro healer kick person in the, like, I don't actually care that much.
Yeah.
Like, I just want Blizzard to not hemorrhage all the different ways that healers have had skill expression over the years of M+. And it just feels like the walls are coming down and they're just stripping away everything, and I'm left with nothing except for raw healing throughput, and I don't like that. Give me damage back, give me ways to help my team back, give me something. But the way it feels now does not feel good.
I think damage should be...
About the damage thing, I think it's very interesting. I actually kind of agree with Ellesmere to the point that, like, everyone has these weird expectations about what you are like, it's just so outdated and, like, wrong, and, like, they can't design the game around how people are going to feel, or I mean, they do, but they don't. Like, so one example is Bloodlust, right? So one thing about Bloodlust is if you do noob keys, like 10 to 12 or whatever, you'll find that people, like, don't like having the responsibility of having the Bloodlust button, right? Like, they'll ask you, especially healers, they don't want to be in charge of it. And it's like, well, they're afraid that they're going to press Bloodlust and everyone's going to be mad and it's going to be like a bad use or whatever. But when you do those keys, 99% of the time, the problem is that they don't press the fucking button. And you go through a 22-minute key and they press Bloodlust 1 time when you could have done 3. And it's like, people are so scared about making one mistake that they just make another mistake. And, like, you can't really design around, like, anticipating what mistakes people are going to be afraid of, you know? Like, there's some sliding scale where, like, healer damage, for example, has to have some level of impact. And they can't just make it have, I mean, I guess they could if they wanted to, but they shouldn't make it have 0 impact just because people are scared to do damage. Like, there's some level of where Ellesmere can have fun and really min-max and like show his skill with damage, but at the same time, if you just are a civilian in a 12 key, that you can just do literally 0 damage and be fine. And like what he said, right? Like if people are gonna flame you for doing 0 damage or whatever, like I don't know, people are demons. Like they're gonna flame you no matter what. Like bro, I was queuing some Overwatch, like just total trench tier games lately because that's how good I am at that game. I'm terrible. And dude, the fights that people get in, the most demonic players over the stupidest shit. Like I'm in these games and people are like, one guy started screaming at this other guy, but then he didn't know what he was saying and he started speaking in Spanish. And then the guy got mad that he wasn't understanding, so he started Google translating his insults into Spanish so that he could paste it into the chat to tell the other guy he's a dog in Spanish. And it's just like, dude, these people are demons. Like, there's no level of like, oh, Blizzard is gonna hit the mark where healer damage is perfect, and people aren't gonna feel like they have to or whatever. Like, they just sort of have to like think about the design and what's fun and what's good for the game.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I totally get what Ellesmere's saying about the whole like let people play what they want to play, but I think it like for me it really just comes down to what Blizzard is targeting, which is people feeling pressured to play a build they don't want to play. What is the most egregious example of healer damage? Probably Ashen Hollow, Venthyr Paladin.
Yeah,
Power
That's probably one
Infusion
of the
is
worst.
pretty fucking cringe, but
It's true. Okay,
Agreed. Agreed.
but I think just like going back, that damage, we saw people start off as Ashen Hollow like 5% Venthyr Holy Paladins. I looked up the stats. At the end of 9.1, directly before swappable covenants, it was a 50-50 split between Venthyr and Kyrian. There was a pretty big shift towards the damage because people felt like they had to go the damage build, whether or not they actually had to or not. And all I really want to point out, I guess, just from my point of view, is I think that really does trickle down from the top pretty significantly, way more than like 1% of people. The way you play WoW is at this point, you go copy a build, you go watch the streamers, you take what they're doing, whether or not it's actually good, because people don't think about it a lot of the time. So like,
Sure,
I totally get where you're coming from. But yeah,
so
I'll let
two
him take-
things. I think one, that is not how the average player plays. I think that that's how we see the average player playing, because that's the average people that we encounter. But WoW is massive, and the amount of people that play this game that don't even know what Twitch or Archon or any of these fucking Wowhead meta builds, they don't give a shit. They just pop on the starter build and slam. And so I don't entirely agree with you on that. However, I do understand your perspective, but I will counter that with using such an egregious example as Ashen Hollow is probably not the best idea, because of course people felt pressured to play that when it was like the most insanely broken thing in existence. There has been nothing even comparable to how broken Ashen Hollow was in Season 1 of Shadowlands for healers, especially in terms of healer damage. Excluding that one extreme outlier, I do not think that you will find big examples of community pressure to play builds that are damage focused as a healer. In fact, I can't think of a single one outside of Ashen Hollow. And I think that that's just because Ashen Hollow was such an absolutely egregious example.
That's totally fair. I mean, we could agree there's just a line somewhere, though, where it's too powerful.
Yep, absolutely.
Somewhere between healers that do 0 damage now and Ashen Hollow. Somewhere in between there, it's correct.
Don't get me wrong. The last thing I'm advocating for is Ashen Hollow levels of healer damage. That shit was not acceptable in any way. Dude. But I also shouldn't walk in and equipped with a pool noodle and just smack mobs on the head for 30 minutes and then be like, oh, look, at least I PI'd my DPS so they did something. I'm useful. Like, I want something else to do besides just heal.
Do you remember that meta where your Ellie shaman would Earth Ellie and tank the Pride, then your bear would shift into healer form in Heart of the Wild and heal the group, and then the Paladin would Ashen Hollow the next pull as the DPS?
Dude, when I would like Heart of the Wild heal the Pride, and it's just like, what the fuck is even going on?
when I got to yell at Onesie to pop into Heart of the Wild because I wasn't gonna heal, oh, good times, man. I missed that. I missed that.
Invoke the Pride so the Paladin could ashen the fucking boss after the Pride. It was the craziest change, or that was the craziest meta I've ever seen.
Yeah, that shit was for sure unacceptable. And also, for what it's worth, Ashen Hall was some of the most dog shit Holy Pally gameplay of all time. Like, the playstyle was just fucking horrible. Sorry, by the way, if I'm not supposed to be cursing on this. I've just been...
No,
you're all good.
So.
We'd warn you. You've done everything correct so far. Good work.
Okay, all right.
All right, Squishy's got to go in 10 minutes. Ellesmere, where can people find you?
Twitch, probably, or YouTube, or Twitter.
Wingsup.com, perhaps?
Yeah, Wings is up for sure. If you are interested in HPAL, or if you're interested in Vigor, perhaps there will be a new somethingisup.com coming.
What is the cooldown called for Vigor again?
Bookisup.com, the Vigor guide.
Avatarisup.com. Yeah, Ellesmere's been working on his game. I know he's got his merch. I know he's going to be rolling out guides for HPAL for sure. When you're worried about not being able to express your skill in the midnight, and then you realize that you're dog shit and you need to get good at Holy Paladin, wingsup.com is where you need to go, and we'll throw all the links to all of his stuff in the description. Any sorry to abrupt end words.
Oh, you're good. We've been yapping for like 2 hours.
Yeah, we were just hard yapping, but it was a great conversation. Any shout out you want to give, or whatever?
Not particularly. Just thanks for having me. Had a great time, and look forward to midnight.
Yeah, I appreciate it, buddy. Thank you for grounding our views a little bit here.
Thanks so much, Ellesmere.
All right, you guys have a good night.
Yep, take it easy, bud.
All right, and thank you so much, Ellesmere, for joining the podcast. Again, you guys can check down in the description for any of his links, all of his socials, and whatnot. This was a very long conversation, so we're going to get on out of here as we're running a little bit low on time. We will be back next week. We're going to be having some Q&A. I think there's some discussions about random shop decor with the trading with the shop. That wasn't controversial at all. We'll probably not have any takes on that, but we will see you guys next week. Goodbye.
Peace.
Goodbye.